Hi, I'm Scott Griffith, and welcome to another edition of our Land and Legacy by Griffith Realty. And of course, I'm accompanied by my sister Carol, Vice President of Griffith Realty. And we are extremely honored today to have with us a very special guest, a old friend and a outstanding economist, Danielle Hale from realtor.com, the chief economist for realtor.com. And as most people in our industry and probably across the country know, realtor.com is probably the leading search engine, maybe competitive with one other big name, for online housing searches. And historically, realtor.com was started by the National Association of Realtors, and ultimately they turned it over to people who are professional at operating these kind of sites. And this is probably the most up-to-date and accurate website in the nation for listings that are updated to it on a moment-by-moment basis, so that people can stay current with their searching for their homes online. So Danielle helps guide them in issues that deal with the actual economy as it relates to realtor.com. Welcome, Danielle. Thank you so much for being our guest.
Thanks for having me today.
So Danielle's organization gets a lot of attention, and Danielle gets a lot of questions about what's going on in the economy, especially given the economy is now on the move again. And by that, I mean interest rates are going up and housing prices are going up and demand is off the charts. And so, Danielle, what are some of the things that like realtor.com tracks through your department?
Yeah, that's a great question, Scott. So you talked about how we have listings data. We sit at a really interesting intersection because MLSs across the country also have listings data. So they have a lot of the same information that we have, but we have a little bit more because we get to marry all that MLS data from across the country. So it gives us a really broad picture of what's going on in housing markets. And then we can also dig into what we see locally. And then on top of the real estate listing data that comes from all of the MLSs and realtor associations across the country, we've got shopping traffic because people are coming to realtor.com to find homes, sometimes to find rentals or investment properties, but a lot of times to find homes to live in. And so we can compare what we're seeing in the market with how home shoppers are interacting with those listings and get some really interesting insights. So it's a really great place to be. And I love doing the research at realtor.com.
I'm sure you get lots of great data, as they say, and so that's fun. That's really fun. So, this is currently the spring market of 2022, and I'm sure you've got historic information. How's our spring comparing to last year?
That is a great question. So far, we're seeing a lot of indicators that demand is still higher than what we saw as normal before the pandemic, but maybe not quite as red hot as what we saw in the spring of 2021. So I think your point of comparison is going to be really important. If you look at shopping traffic on the site, if you look at home sales data, it's interesting because we're at a bit of a transition point. So we actually track data and put it out on a weekly basis of what we're seeing in the housing market. And we release it on Thursday, so it's fresh today. And if you look at home price growth, asking prices, the typical asking price increased about 14% this week, which is a little bit faster than what they did last week. So at least sellers putting homes up for sale are still asking and expecting to see a significant amount of price growth. At the same time, homes are selling faster than they sold at 1 year ago, about 6 days faster. But when we started the year, homes were selling on the order of like 20 to 25 days faster than a year ago. So the market is still very quick moving, but we're not seeing that same increase of intensity as we had seen before. So there's a little bit of a, shifting back towards normal there. And then if you're looking for a home, you're probably not surprised to hear that there aren't very many available for sale, broadly speaking, nationally. That's probably the biggest understatement. But we're starting to see those declines shrink. So we're still seeing the number of homes for sale down lower than last year, but it's week after week, we're seeing the gap shrink. And so I expect in the next couple of weeks, we might even see the number of homes for sale exceed what we saw last year. Now, big picture context, there's still fewer homes available for sale than what we considered to be normal before the pandemic.
Right.
So the market is, it's still going to be a little bit tough for buyers as far as the number of options that they see, but we're starting to move in a better direction on some of those indicators.
So do the typical transactions less than 30 days across the country, right?
So, yep, homes are
Just
selling quickly.
so in your industry, that's got to be a challenge because there's a tendency to look at things on a monthly basis. We found, and the reason I bring this up, even on our local MLS level, we try to explain to people that it's difficult to go by a monthly flashpoint of inventory when in reality a home can come on the market and literally sell and close in less than 30 days, and it never hits their statistic. So sometimes we wonder if it's a bit skewed. You're at least blessed with a day-to-day counter system, so you probably do much better and an accurate job than, say, these other systems. But that's just fascinating how the world has changed so much. 30 days didn't used to be, that would have been a fast closing with mortgages and things. And today we have cash buyers and things like that to make it so different. How many transactions are now cash compared to financing?
Oh, that's a good question. It's been a while since I've looked at these exact
Well,
stats, but
it's all
it's
right.
probably in the order of 20 to 30% or so. And depending on the source you use, you're going to get a slightly different figure, but
Sure.
that's probably the right range.
Isn't that fascinating? I mean, uh, that people have managed to find cash in a more expensive market. You know, it's just a kind of a unique anomaly, I guess you'd say. You know,
It's one of those like paradoxical things. So if you look at down payment trends by metro area, and we've got some research one of my colleagues is working on now that hopefully will be published in the next couple of weeks. So that's why I can speak to it right now.
be looking for
Um,
this.
so down payment trends by metro area, you might think that in high cost areas that down payments would be lower because they're expensive. It's hard for people to amass the cash. But what we actually find is that in a lot of those large markets that tend to be perennially competitive, that attract a lot of international interest and are just places where real estate investment has done well over the long term. They're so competitive that people need to bring cash to compete, and so you actually see higher down payments on average in those markets, even though home prices are higher. So it's a little bit unexpected, but it's been a pretty consistent trend that we've seen over the last few years.
So isn't that the darndest thing? You know, I know that I've had enough conversations to know that certainly demographics are working against the concept of making everything go back to normal really quickly because with the low supply, but yet so many millennials fully employed, able to get work wherever they want, we're seeing them all in the housing market at the same time and therefore creating such a demand market. It's kind of interesting because I've had a lot of people saying, "Oh, the housing prices have to fall," and I keep going, "Not when the largest population since the baby boomers is about to buy a house. It may flatten out, or there may be pressures, but I can't fathom a fall of prices." But if it's falling, that would be what people characterize as a bubble, right? That's the bursting of the bubble. Is that what we're talking about when people talk about the bubble?
I think that's a great question. Economists have a notoriously difficult time trying to pin down what exactly is a bubble. But when you ask most people to describe it, I think they have a pretty good idea in mind. And that generally involves drastically falling house prices that presumably preceded a big run up in house prices. So, yeah, I think when people think about a bubble, they just don't want to be on the other side of that trade where if they bought a house and you see the value plummet, there's,
Yeah.
probably makes it harder to sleep at night. Though, something that I heard people say, and I do think this is relevant, like if you can afford your mortgage payment and you stay employed and keep your monthly payments and that sort of thing, even if your house goes down in value, you've still got a place to live. So I do think that perspective is important, and the reason why real estate bubbles or price fluctuations are different than in other types of commodities or investments like stocks.
Well, it's a slower transaction, and therefore, as you say, a slight change you don't have to react to. You may not even be able to react to. So you should probably hold on for the longer run, not the shorter runs, right? So one of the statistics I recently been reading, which is fascinating to me, and I was mentioning to Carol, is that I think housing as a percentage of the cost of your household last year was in the 20 something range because 3.5% interest rates on the average sale price of a house. Today we're up to, now it's about 30% if you took the average sale price and the 5% interest rates that we're seeing. And that's about where Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac has historically used as the qualification line for your payment shouldn't get higher than that. It makes me start to believe, and I was just wondering what your thoughts are, that probably we're starting to see that point where housing prices really can't push up because the capacity of the buyers are about to be matched with the house price. Is that kind of what you would guess?
Yeah, I think that's very much true. And, a lot of people see that and then think, well, I guess that means house prices have to fall to adjust. But there are a couple ways that we can adjust out of that. We could see mortgage rates decline. I think that's maybe not super likely given
It's a
the
hope.
Fed's
It's just a hope.
policies. But it's one possibility. I'm just laying out the scenarios here. So that's one possibility. I don't think it's very likely, but that's one possibility. Another possibility is that we could see incomes play catch up, especially in an environment where prices are rising more generally, where unemployment is near record lows, where inflation is high. There's a lot of competitive pressures on companies because of what some people have called the Great Resignation. I do think that's an area of opportunity. If income growth were to pick up, then we might see home prices. I mean, so let me back up a step. I don't think they're going to continue at double-digit pace. I do
kind of
think
hope not.
I do think the home price growth will slow, but that might be another reason why we might not see prices fall to bring the share of income back in line with house payments. It could be that we see incomes rise.
Sure. Yeah, I do find it difficult. This is going to be me opinionating, but it's difficult because the Fed uses all these things, including housing prices and car prices, to talk about inflation and do monetary policy. And the reality is the people I talk to on the street are worried about gas and food and all those other things they don't do every day, so they don't really care if inflation's whatever it is. They just know they're paying more at the things they need every day. And so there seems to be kind of a lack of a nexus between what the Fed says and does and what they feel like they're feeling, and I guess it's America, right? It's how it works.
It's funny that you say that. Just today, I was pointing out the gas prices to my son on his way to preschool. So people pay attention to it's what you see every day.
And you didn't say to him, let me explain inflation to your son and all the things that go into it?
Maybe not quite. Let's wait for a couple more years.
Oh, that's great. That's great. So what do you think? You look at the data and make prognostications from it. What do you think about this future of this year? Do you think we look at this year and go, it looks like last year? Do we say, well, it's not as good, or do you say things are getting better all the time? What's your thoughts?
Yeah, so we usually do our housing forecast just once a year.
Uh-huh.
And we published it in December of 2021. We are probably going to have to update that forecast this year because, like a lot of other housing forecasters who release forecasts in that early December period, we were way off.
Well,
that's just
forecasting.
The reality. The mortgage, I think a lot of people expected mortgage rates to go higher. And it's funny, when we released our forecast, we were on the higher end of what people expected mortgage rates to do. And we had mortgage rates coming in at 3.6% for 2022. We are significantly above that already, and we're only in the first third of the year. So that's one of the big reasons that we're going to have to adjust our forecast. In that earlier environment, we expected home price growth to slow, but for prices to still grow at about 3% per year, and home sales growth to slow, but also to still grow at I believe it was 6 or 7%. I can't remember these numbers because we're working on new ones right now.
It's all going to be different in a few minutes. Yeah,
That's right. So the new numbers, we haven't released them yet, but I do think we're likely to see sales come in lower than what we saw last year. Last year was a really strong sales year for housing. I think even though sales come in a little bit lower this year, it's still going to be one of the better years over the last decade. So I think it's important to keep that in perspective. And you were talking, Scott, about the millennial generation. They're so large. They're at ages where they're very active in the housing market now, not
Yeah.
only as first-time buyers, but in some cases as trade-up buyers. And that's going to be a really important phenomenon and help keep sales happening, because housing is driven very much by people's life stage and life
Yeah.
considerations. It's great to be able to buy when the market's good and sell when the market's high. But life happens when you're not always expecting it. And so
Yeah.
I think housing is going to be okay. And we're still going to see a significant amount of activity just because of those generational trends.
So I don't know if you remember, Danielle, but we live in an area that used to be so wonderful because it's kind of ruralish, but we're between four major markets in Michigan. And they were all convenient within an hour. So you could get to Detroit, Ann Arbor, Flint, and Lansing. And so the two-income families found us as a bedroom community to be a great place to live. Ironically, with the work from home phenomenon, we're now just as desirable because all of a sudden they got all the quality of life and they only have to drive once a week, twice a week. They'll even go 2 hours to work if they only got to drive once, And so all of a sudden we're this great community where you could go bicycling in the backyard. Every millennial's got a dog, so you can have a dog, and downtown didn't work so good for that. And so all of a sudden we just had a big shift of the same people are buying, but for a totally different reason, and yet it's still a good community. It's just a peculiarity of the world, but it came out pretty good for us. It's just interesting how that works, Back to something about location, I guess. But what do I know? So.
Yeah, and I imagine that trend's going to continue. I think how often people are going to go into offices in the future, that's an open question. But those markets like yours that are in close proximity to a bunch of different areas that really broaden your set as a household looking for different job opportunities, I think that's exactly where you want to be.
Yeah, and we are seeing, just like everybody, so many for sale by owner signs. So one of the things that's that we talk about a little bit here is because of those things I talked about, those features, our average sale price is quite high in our county comparatively, say, to other areas. And so the challenge, and this is, I guess I started doing this on a broad basis because you could probably talk to it a little bit, is the attainable housing issue. 75% of the people who work in what I call the day-to-day jobs have to drive into our community to work here, but couldn't afford to live here. The people that can afford to live here are the ones I was talking about that could drive out. So it's a upside down sort of world, when your housing does well. You don't get as much established workers in the community type effect. Your teachers, police, fast food, things like that. And I'm guessing that we're not unique by any means in that fashion. So is there anything that you track at yours about that type of demographic moving, or is that just not yet on the radar at realtor.com stuff?
So it is an important policy consideration. It's not something that we have tried to answer or look at with our data, but I have gotten a lot of questions lately. I mean, that's the idea behind the movement of cities rezoning. For example, Minneapolis rezoned all the real estate in their entire metropolitan area to be able to, by right, give owners the right to develop more dense land. So it wasn't all single family housing. And California has just done a similar move statewide. So, these single family communities that people really enjoy are great. And people really like single family homes, but with a lot of demand in an area, a single family home is not necessarily attainable for every single family. And so adding a mix of types of housing helps have a mix of types of people who can afford to live in an area. And so that's how some areas are tackling it. I don't know if you guys have taken a similar approach at all, or if there are any policy options that you're looking at.
Well, you can imagine it's a wrath of political conversations, and nothing's ever a good one because once somebody lives here, they want to live just like that. and changing the mixture and the way it works and who lives beside you and everything can be controversial. So all those conversations go on. As they say, all politics is local. Carol, my sister, is a county commissioner, and they wrestle with these kind of things on a regular basis of how the community responds to the ability to have people be able to work here, that when you have industry here and they can't. It's complicated, very complicated.
It is complicated and hard to, like you said, try to find a solution that works for everyone, because a lot of ideas that people like in theory, when it changes how they go about their day to day, it doesn't seem as good of an idea. And so it's hard to adapt to change.
Well, and you can imagine, it's probably no secret, Michigan grew up as a automobile driving world. So mass transit, clustering, rail, all those things are just kind of like never been really well developed in Michigan. So if everything's about a car, and we're all going to be driving electric ones soon. It's just going to be interesting to see how that works. But anyway, so that's kind of changes our whole policy structures around here. And it's without mass transit, it's hard to do that clustering and things. So we'll wrestle for that for a while, I'm sure. It's what you're used to. Everybody grows up not far from here, seems like, so they get used to it. So tell us about Washington, D.C., where you live. How's it there? Is it like still growing? Is it still vibrant or not? How's it go?
So it is. The DC market is one of the larger markets that has not grown as fast as some others. Growth has been a little bit more stable. The government has adopted pretty broad work from home policies, which I think has pushed people further out to the suburbs. And so you see the same phenomenon that you see where, downtown, there's a premium to live there and your real estate buck doesn't go as far. And so if you can move out to the suburbs, people do. And so that is something that we've certainly seen a lot more activity out in the suburbs. We struggle with the same kind of density issues. I mean, probably a little bit different, but same type issues when you think about how can you make the community affordable to a broad swath of the population. The suburb that I live in particular, there's lots of conversation going on about that right now. So those challenges are everywhere. But we're moving into the spring home buying and home selling season. So seen lots of real estate signs up in the neighborhood. And let me tell you, they're still going under contract pretty quickly. So even though mortgage rates are rising, I'm still seeing a lot of real estate activity around here.
So you probably know, and as I do, that Lawrence Young, the national economist, has for a year or two really pushed real hard about new construction not keeping up, and we need more new construction, create more supply, and it makes sense. It's at realtor.com, I'm sure, because we know that the things we list from our MLS go to you, you're getting a lot of the new construction information. Do you track that type of, are you also tracking new construction information, or do you not segregate it that much?
So it's funny, we used to segregate it, and then we recently stopped, and now we've decided to resegregate it. But so it means I don't have a good recent view on those stats. But it's something that we will have soon. I will say, when it comes to that housing shortage, we also have an estimate of, just how far off we are. We think if you look at household growth over the last decade and single family housing starts, and we look at single family housing starts because it's a better proxy for what's going on in the owner occupied market. A lot of what's built among multifamily housing is for rent. So if you look at that, we've had 5.8 million households formed over the number of single family homes that we've built. And for context, we're building right now, when building is kind of at the higher end of what we've seen over the last 5 years, we're building about 1.2 million single family homes a year. So basically, if all of the building that we did for the next 5 years was put towards closing the gap, that's how long it would take. It would take about 5 years to close the gap that has developed over the last decade, because we've had so many households formed and we just weren't really building to keep up.
Isn't that amazing? Yeah. And certainly with the supply chain issues and therefore the cost of construction pushing costs so high, it's keeping the resale market high because there's no downward pressure, because if you want to build new, it's going to go more. So it's a peculiar dynamic. So,
so I'm curious now, because I see this
sure.
in the data.
Yep.
You see that existing homes have a lower month supply than new homes.
Yep.
The existing homes are close to 2, new homes are close to 6. But if you look at the new homes data, it's broken out by different stages of construction. So a lot of the new homes that are available for sale are either under construction or not even started yet. So it's not quite as move-in ready as your existing home that, is just waiting the 30 days or so until you close. And I wonder if you see that at all in your market, if buyers are kind of preferring new construction because it's more abundant, or if you see a lot of new construction that is really having a hard time getting completed. And so buyers who are on a tight timeline tend to prefer existing homes.
So what's your thoughts, Kara?
Well, I think with the new construction, it's taking quite from the time that you do your plans and work out everything with your builder. In some cases, their timetable is 2 years for a sizable home. So that throws the whole thought process another way, because most those folks that want new construction would like to sell their house now, why they think they can sell it at the peak, but they have to find an interim place to live during that construction period, and that's tough because we don't have a lot of rentals, and if we do, they're really expensive for a transient family. So I think people still prefer just to move into an existing home. It's also hard right now in our area to get a good handle on what the final cost of the new construction is, because the builders are still seeing great increases in the materials or supply chain issues.
In fact, they offer a price, but then when you sit down with them, it's really a cost plus pricing system. And they say to you, I can't, for instance, I can't tell you what a door is going to cost because I can't tell if I'm going to get it in a week or in 4 months. And if they pass on the increase to me, I'm just going to charge you my 10% above that. Well, that means you don't know your cost, right? And so,
especially at the end, you don't know.
The one thing about all of us is nobody likes the unknown, and most people, even if it could be to the better, you just don't want to buy the unknown, And so, for people who say I'd love to buy a new home, it ends there because they wouldn't accept the risk or their perceived risk. So it's a peculiarity. There's no doubt about it, So it looks like more homes for sale because they haven't started them, and if they do, we don't know when they're going to build them.
Yeah, they're coming.
Yeah.
They're coming soon.
I promise you, I'd build a house right there if you want it.
Yeah. And thanks to HGTV, everybody thinks they're just going to move in tomorrow with their clothes and off we go,
Yeah, they'll just improve their $10,000 kitchen. And
yep.
off they
And then
go.
it's done in a day.
It's all done. Well, Danielle, we appreciate your taking the time. We don't want to take your whole day up. We know you cut out something just special for us, and we thank you very much.
Thank you for joining us.
Yeah. So
absolutely, it's been fun to chat.
Thanks. It's been great talking to you. So with that, I'd like to thank you all for watching Land and Legacy again, and we hope that we'll see you again very soon. Thank you very much.